All right, so you might be familiar with the term counting calories. If not, it's okay. Counting calories used to be something we only associated with bodybuilders. Now it's widely accepted that counting calories should be an adopted practice of those trying to lose weight as well. Here's what you need to consider. A huge focus of Breakthrough 101 is the mental preparation for your weight loss journey. That means you'll be preparing yourself to scrap your bad habits and replace them with better habits. These new, healthier habits won't just form themselves. You'll have to work on getting better every day. And because weight loss is something that you truly desire, your full commitment is expected. That's not too much to ask, is it? Getting better every day means that you'll have to practice. LeBron James didn't wake up great. He practiced. Tom Brady didn't climb out of bed and decide to become a great quarterback. He practiced. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson wasn't always a great performer. He had to practice to get where he is today. The same understanding applies to you and your weight loss journey. It's not about perfection. It's about progression. Day by day, little by little, step by step, you'll get better over time. Your body changes over time. When you adopt healthier habits, your health will improve over time. You just have to be patient and continue to put in the work every day. Counting calories is something you'll learn to do every day to create a new pattern. Your brain will form new neural pathways, getting stronger and stronger until the behavior of counting calories becomes normal to you. You'll be making the conscious effort to do better, making healthier decisions. I know that it's not easy, but you may see it as tedious. I get it. You may even ask yourself, what's the point? But what I can assure you of, it's worth it. Understanding what you're putting into your body is what makes this process so valuable. More than likely, you've never taken this approach before, but this is going to hold you accountable. Counting calories helps us understand serving size and exercise portion control. It gives you something tangible to work with every time you get ready to sit down and eat your meal. Being able to associate quality and quantity is what I love about it. It allows us to retrain our brain to match our weight loss goals. And since we develop our weight loss goals by creating the ideal image of our healthy cells, it's the perfect solution. You eat the way you desire to look and feel. Think about it. When someone decides they want to become a bodybuilder, they have to prepare their mind to start eating a particular way. Depending on how much they need to beef up, they may be consuming well in excess of 2 times what they're currently used to eating. On top of eating more, changing their diet, they also have to work out more and understanding how to stimulate their muscular hypertrophy. So, there are a lot of similarities, especially mentally. Now, do you think that everyone who set out to become a professional bodybuilder saw it through? No way. For one, eating more usually means you'll have to spend more money on food. If you're not a good cook, then eating out can get very pricey. If you only have a limited number of foods that you know how to prepare, then redundancy can be a factor. The commitment itself, the amount of time needed to get bigger and stronger, can also cause a conflict, especially if you have the responsibilities of a family or a demanding career. See, losing weight and bodybuilding are more alike than you know. Now let's look at what actually is involved in counting calories and why it's such a valuable skill. So I'm going to start by introducing you to Leslie. She's a 28-year-old third grade teacher who's looking to lose weight. She wants to fall in love and get married by the time that she's 30. She's ready to get to work. So what we have to look at first is basal metabolic rate. This is going to give us an idea of how much energy Leslie's body would need to keep her alive if she were at rest. And to measure this, I'm going to use the Harris-Benedict equation, which is one of the more reliable measures of BMR, used in both science and medical environments. Now, the calculation for women is slightly different from men, as you can see in this diagram. Let's look at all the data we'll need for Leslie. Height, 5'3". Her weight, 220 pounds. Age, 28. And upon plugging all these numbers into the equation, we can determine at rest, Leslie's body uses 1,448 calories a day. Now, keep in mind that BMR is a factor that changes. Not only does it change with all the quantitative factors we just used in this equation, but we also have to consider other factors like hormonal changes, altitude, medication, genetics, temperature, and other lifestyle considerations. And another important component of counting calories is the lifestyle factor. The lifestyle factor, also known as activity factor, is attached to the basal metabolic rate. And what we're going to look at is how Leslie's daily activity impacts her overall energy usage. See, Leslie's life is pretty textbook. Right now, her passion is teaching and impacting the lives of her students. She has a membership to the local YMCA and does a group exercise class on Wednesday and a solo workout on most Saturdays. Outside of that, she spends a lot of time at home and with her roommate and her dog. The lifestyle factor can be broken up into about 4 to 5 categories based on level of activity, occupational demands, and so on. So let's use this breakdown. 1.2 times is about the standard factor above calories used at rest. Let's say someone has a sedentary occupation and doesn't commit to any physically demanding activities. 1.375 times is what's considered lightly active, perhaps working out 1 to 3 times per week. This factor suits Leslie pretty well. She's active at work, but not very consistent with her activity outside of work. Now, 1.55 times is a moderate activity level where exercise is a little more consistent, maybe about 3 to 5 days per week. This is right at the lower end of what the physical activity guidelines for Americans might suggest. 1.725 times is the next factor, and this is considered pretty active, exercising about 6 to 7 times per week. Now, the highest factor is 1.9, even though we could use up to 2.1 to get a better idea of a highly active individual, perhaps someone that works a physically demanding job or is a trained athlete, maybe even characterized by someone who loses a lot of fluid throughout the day and has to replenish their electrolytes often. All right, so back to Leslie. If we use 1.375 times her basal metabolic rate, that puts her at about 1,991 calories. Now, there is one last factor that we need to consider before coming up with Leslie's total daily energy expenditure, or TDEE. We need to consider the thermic effect of food, which is also known as the thermic effect of eating, specific dynamic action, or even dietary thermogenesis. And that's the amount of energy needed to absorb, digest, and store the food that we eat. So yes, just like they say, it takes money to make money, it takes calories to burn calories, or better yet, it takes energy to store energy, and so on. Now, this next factor is a little tricky because body composition is a huge factor. The leaner an individual is, the higher the thermic effect would be. It's suggested that maintaining lean muscle requires about 3 times the amount of energy as fat does. Now, this can make up anywhere between 6 to 10% of total calorie usage. In more extreme circumstances, perhaps where an individual has very high body fat percentage or where one has very high lean muscle percentage, those numbers could improve or worsen by about 2 to 3%. Another contributor to the thermic effect of food is the food type. When we look at the specific macronutrient profile, proteins require more energy to digest, absorb, and store than fat or carbohydrates. So it's estimated that proteins will use approximately 20 to 35% of the calories consumed to absorb, digest, and store or dispose of it. Carbohydrates will use 5 to 10%, and fats will use 5 to 15%. Unfortunately, Leslie doesn't currently keep track of her calories. Now, one of her reasons for weight gain has been her reluctance to cook or plan ahead. Instead, she finds herself on the go eating out with friends or family, so we'll give her a 6% consideration. That would mean that she's consuming about 2,100 calories per day on average. Now, research suggests that a pound of fat is equivalent to 3,500 calories. And to create a caloric deficit, we need to look at the fact that there are 7 days in a week, so we divide 3,500 by 7, and that gives us 500 calories a day to lose 1 pound of fat. Here's what we consider now. Is that a reasonable weight loss goal? Yes. Losing a pound of fat per week is a safe goal to set for your starting weight loss journey. A slightly more aggressive approach would be a max of about 2 pounds per week or a 7,000 calorie deficit. If you were to choose a more aggressive approach, you divide 7,000 by 7, and that gives you 1,000 calories per day of a deficit. So, what that would look like for Leslie is a caloric intake of 2,100 minus 500 equals 1,600, which is what we suggest, or 2,100 minus 1,000 equals 1,100 calories per day, which is a slightly more aggressive approach. Now, anytime we consider weight loss, we have to look at our body's natural tendency to return us to our body set weight. The body set weight is a theory that I first came aware of when I started reading The Obesity Code by Dr. Jason Fung. He points out that our body has an internal thermometer, given the term apostat, that works to regulate our body weight. It suggests that when we lose weight, our body's internal apostat works against us to return us back to our body set weight by slowing our basal metabolism. Then, in an effort to resist the return of body fat, you know what we do. We further reduce our calories, and our basal metabolism drops even further in an attempt to return us to our body set weight. This is why any goal, whether it be weight loss or weight gain, requires patience. The key is progression. We don't typically gain 52 pounds in a year unless we're looking at something like pregnancy, but losing 1 pound of fat per week and 52 pounds of fat is really good, really, really good. The reason why it's really, really good is because that's just fat we're looking at. We're not even looking at the overall tissue and fluid loss. When most people lose weight, they're typically losing some muscle, some fat, and water. When you incorporate strength training into your exercise regimen, you're working to add lean muscle to your frame. And as we discussed, lean muscle requires 2 to 3 times the amount of energy to maintain than fat does. So understand that there's no perfect way of counting calories, and there are many variables that could affect the outcome of any calculation. So what we all have to do is make sure that we're doing what we can to incorporate the concepts of portion control and understanding the nutritional composition of our diet when we're working toward any health goal. Now, one of the most important parts about counting calories is knowing what you're counting. The scientific definition for calorie with the big C or kilocalorie is the energy or heat needed to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. To me, I consider it to be the currency we use to nourish our body. If our intake is too high, the excess is going to be stored as fat. If our intake is too low, it can lead to the catabolism of lean muscle. The calorie is a huge factor in weight loss. Now, one of the most debated aspects of counting calories is understanding macronutrients, or macros for short. Wouldn't it just be easy if I could tell Leslie she could eat 3 meals of 533 calories each? Sounds simple, right? If that's counting calories, then what's all the hype about? But unfortunately, it's not that simple. Macros is where it starts getting complex. Macronutrients are broken down into 3 categories: fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. To add another layer of complexity to this process, each macronutrient varies in caloric value. Fats are 9 calories per gram. Proteins and carbohydrates are both 4 calories per gram. Now, when you're reading a nutrition label and applying the caloric density of macros per serving, these numbers have to be considered. Let's look at this example. Leslie keeps a jar of Candy M on her desk and thinks she grabs a couple of handfuls a day on average. Now, let's assume that her average handful is equal to a pack of the standard size of Candy M. So that leaves us with 9 grams of fat, 35 grams of carbs, and 2 grams of protein. So if you're trying to lose weight, you need to understand caloric density and nutritional density. For instance, if Leslie's caloric intake is limited to 1,600 calories a day, 1 bag of Candy M leaves her with 1,350 calories for the day to nourish her body. The macro breakdown in calories from Candy M looks like this: 8 calories of protein, 81 calories of fat, and 140 calories of carbs. Now let's look at Leslie's morning routine. She says she normally stops by the coffee shop on her way to work to get a morning jolt. Her beverage of choice is the caramel macchiato. The macros break down like this: 7 grams of fat, 35 grams of carbs, and 10 grams of protein. That's 63 fat calories, 140 calories of carbs, and 40 grams of protein. Leslie's now left with 1,100 calories for the day to nourish her body with. The most recent guidelines for Americans recommend that 20 to 35% of our total daily caloric intake should be allocated for fats. It's also recommended that less than 10% of total calories are from saturated fats. For example, Leslie's diet would top out at 560 calories per day of fat. If the maximum saturated fat intake is 10%, 160 calories of the 560 calories could come from saturated fat sources, such as what's found in high-fat dairy products or red meat. So, let's look at what we know so far to be true about Leslie's diet. She starts her morning with 4.5 grams or 41 calories of saturated fat in her drink from the coffee shop. Candy M contains 6 grams or 54 calories of saturated fat. So on a normal day for Leslie, a coffee and a candy equal 95 calories of saturated fat. We know that on Leslie's new diet plan, she's going to need to find substitutes for those cravings. Only 29% of individuals in the United States are staying true to the recommended amounts of saturated fat consumption. Adult men and women average 10.9% of total calories for saturated fat intake, while children range anywhere from 11.1 to 12.6%. The focus from a nutritional perspective is to have the entire 20 to 35% daily fat allocation be reserved for monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats only. In general, monounsaturated fat should make up 15 to 20% of our daily fat consumption. Now, popular sources of monounsaturated fats include olive oil, safflower oil, and avocados. Polyunsaturated fat should make up 5 to 10% of our daily fat consumption. Popular sources of polyunsaturated fats include soybean oil, walnuts, and salmon. Now, using Leslie's 1,600 calorie diet, we know that no more than 160 total calories need to come from saturated fat. If we needed to be very aggressive to improve our health, let's imagine we did cut out all the saturated fat intake. That gives us 320 calories of monounsaturated fats and 160 calories from polyunsaturated fats to work with for the entire day. So, of the entire 1600 calorie diet, 30% or 480 calories will come from fat, healthy fats. And if you're wondering about the ketogenic diet plan, it normally includes a total fat intake of about 70 to 75% of daily calories. So if Leslie's nutritionist advised her to start a keto diet, she would be expected to allocate no more than 1,200 calories of her daily 1,600 calorie budget for fats. Now let's explore protein. The recommended dietary allowance for protein is about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. That's a very modest amount, and we use the rate to determine the floor for protein intake. Your protein intake should be calculated much how we calculate the lifestyle factors when we use basal metabolic rate. Now, research suggests that allowing anywhere from an additional 0.6 to 1.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight is safe depending on goals. If we wanted to help Leslie lose weight and change her body composition, she'd need closer to 30% of her daily calories sourced from protein. Now, Leslie currently weighs 220 pounds, so 1 kilogram is approximately 2.21 pounds. If we convert that to measure protein intake, she weighs 99.8 kilograms. That would mean her recommended daily intake of protein could be anywhere from 80 to 220 grams of protein per day. A diet that requires Leslie to allocate 30% of her calories to protein would be reasonable, and it falls in line with a healthy range of protein intake. This would give us a protein factor of 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, or 120 grams of daily protein intake. If we wanted to be more aggressive with Leslie, we could increase the protein intake. We would also need to increase her activity level. Just to give you an idea of increasing her lean protein intake to compensate for an additional 10% of her daily caloric intake, a diet with 40% of all calories reserved per protein for Leslie would be a factor of 1.6 times her kilogram of body weight, or 160 grams, which would be 640 calories per day, like we said, 40% of her diet allocated to protein. Now, depending on your overall diet, your sources of protein could be plant-based or animal-based. If they're animal-based, you'll have to give consideration to the fat content of that particular source. If it's plant-based, you'll need to understand the carbohydrate breakdown. Now, carbohydrates is special, and we have to look at simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates to understand what's going to be the best option for you and why. But we'll get to that in a different lesson. But for now, the biggest component of macro counting with carbs is the added sugars. This is one of the largest contributors to obesity, inflammation, and the development of chronic diseases. Now, when you're looking at a nutrition label, understanding how much added sugar is in that serving of food is critical to your diet. The American Heart Association recommends that men consume no more than 9 teaspoons of sugar per day, and women should consume no more than 6 teaspoons of sugar per day. When you convert that to grams, that equals 36 grams and 144 calories for men, and 25 grams and 100 calories for women. To put this into perspective for you, I'll use another item from Leslie's current diet. She loves Mr. Cola. In fact, she keeps a whole box of them in the staff lounge and has a 12-ounce can for lunch every day with her meal. Now, a 12-ounce can of Leslie's favorite soda contains 40 grams of carbs. Of that, 39 grams are sugar. So it's pretty much a 156-calorie can of sugar. And just to keep you on track, that leaves Leslie with only 950 calories left for the day for some real food. So here's the deal. She's not going to be able to just drop her calories, continue to consume these same fatty and sugary foods, expect to nourish her body and lose weight. It's not going to work. So here's what bothers me. Fructose being fruit sugar and understanding its contribution to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is something we'll talk about in a different chapter. When it comes to Leslie's diet and counting macros, we're going to go with the 30-35-35 diet. 30% fat, 35% protein, 35% carbs, 53 grams of fat, 140 grams of protein, 140 grams of carbs. All right, that's the end of this chapter, and I hope I've been able to help you understand more about counting calories and understanding your macros. All right, so you might be familiar with the term counting